Volodymyr Zelensky was in Washington yesterday, meeting with senators and also meeting with representatives of the military-industrial complex, thanking them for their work and pleading with members of Congress to keep the aid flowing, lest the entire project collapse. We can put up this first image here.
Very good and productive meeting.
We are very thankful that we have such friends.
I've just signed another $200 million drawdown from the Department of Defense for Ukraine, and that'll be coming quickly. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now, if you were just listening to that, you heard the robust White House fire crackling in the background, but that's beautiful. Quite a nice touch, Ryan. That was President. So if you're listening, what you saw was Chuck Schumer, Mitch McConnell walking through the Capitol with Volodymyr Zelensky, different senators, members of Congress swarming him like they're backstage at a Jonas Brothers concert, basically is what it looks like. And Schumer said something like, we had a, quote, very good and productive meeting. Then Zelensky appeared to have a pretty good meeting with President Biden yesterday as well. Really didn't face tough questions while he was here, at least not publicly, Ryan. But on the next point, House Speaker Mike Johnson, who Ryan and I will, we promise to continue our weekly updates as to whether he is a real person, and we can re-up our confirmation that he continues to be real despite having the most generic white man name imaginable, Mike Johnson. Let's actually
not even a white man necessarily name.
It just
name,
like,
right?
Yeah, it is just an American name. You're right. Thank you for calling me on my non-inclusive language. Here's my
Spencer Johnson.
Yes, it is not Spencer Johnson. But what we're going to roll is this tape here, and bear in mind that the House has very little time left to fund the government and is bitterly fighting over all kinds of different goodies. And Ukraine is obviously on the table. Here's what Speaker Mike Johnson said yesterday.
We need a clear articulation of the strategy to allow Ukraine to win. And thus far, their responses have been insufficient. They have not provided us the clarity and the detail that we requested over and over since literally 24 hours after I was handed the gavel as Speaker of the House. And so what the Biden administration seems to be asking for is billions of additional dollars with no appropriate oversight, no clear strategy to win, and none of the answers that I think the American people are owed.
President Zelensky made it so clear how he needs help, but if he gets the help, he can win this war. And he outlined in some great detail, the kind of help he needs and how it will help him win. Even many of our Republican colleagues talked about we are winning this war. And if we get the help, if he gets the help he needs, he will win.
Right. Okay, so that was obviously Chuck Schumer. But what's so funny there is when he says, even my Republican colleagues, he's just talking about Mitch McConnell. Right. He's like, even Mitch and even,
Because
Thune.
Explain to people how far out on a limb Mitch is related to the rest of his conference on this, or at least a big faction of the conference. He
has said, this is an almost amazingly impossible quote, but he has really said that it's the most important thing that they're doing right now is funding Ukraine. And that's for the domestic, this is not a domestic hot war. This is obviously on another continent. It's not to downplay the importance of it. I think it obviously does have implications for the United States, but for the Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell, to say that when there's so much suffering and business to be taken care of in the United States, that is how far out on a limb he is. And it's becoming increasingly problematic with about 10 Republican senators. So, they're upward. The Senate is almost completely split, so 10 isn't a huge block, but it's enough to cause serious problems for Mitch McConnell, especially because you have about 10 senators who are increasingly aligned with what Mike Johnson just said. There's a huge contrast between what Mike Johnson said on he has yet to hear, quote, a clear articulation of strategy. This is a fairly establishment Republican saying that. Kevin McCarthy had similar concerns about Ukraine. He really made it possible for the Mike Johnsons of the world to start publicly expressing their concerns about Ukraine when he said, we don't want a blank check about a year ago. And obviously, sort of from a strategic standpoint, that was an olive branch to the Freedom Caucus and maybe kept them at bay, kept the Matt Gaetzes at bay for another 6 months, something like that. So mission accomplished, kind of.
It's true. I haven't heard of him lately. So the big news out of the White House was that they're open to this hardline kind of their immigration proposal, border proposal that Republicans have saying. Republicans have said, look, you want Ukraine money.
Yes.
You can have it, but to get it, you have to do our bill on the border, not like some compromise immigration plan, but basically you have to just rubber stamp our bill. And the White House was signaling yesterday that they're actually open to that. What did you make of that?
Yeah, that's always been, I actually think, and we've talked about this for weeks, if there will be any compromise struck before the end of the year and as this funding is on the table, it's going to be over immigration. I would have zero optimism because Republicans have no leverage. I'm fairly supportive of H.R. 2. That's the bill that they're talking about, which would basically redo the asylum system here, which is at the heart of a lot of the problems that are happening at the border and are happening in South and Central America. But that said, the reason the White House wants to negotiate with it is because they know Republicans have basically no leverage. And that's where the Freedom Caucus comes in and is going to, like, the odds that all of this gets completely torpedoed and Speaker Mike Johnson is out on his butt in a couple of weeks are honestly really high, because what Republicans don't want to do is allow Biden to say he took tough steps to control the border because he negotiated with Republicans on H.R. 2 and sent more funding to ICE and CBP and sent more funding to the border, drones and all of that stuff, which is part of H.R. 2. And so it allows him to compromise and say, I negotiated to pass part of this bipartisan bill. If he doesn't touch the asylum situation, it basically doesn't matter. You can fund the border as much as you want. It doesn't matter if you don't reform that central part of it. And so that's what's really a problem for Mike Johnson. And when Chuck Schumer said, quote, that Zelensky provided, quote, the kind of help he needs. He described the, quote, kind of help he needs to win the war. That's a huge contrast with Mike Johnson saying there was no clear articulation of strategy. So these are some real sticking points going ahead in the next couple of weeks.
And this is where we get to the weird incentives that our political system produces. Because on the one hand, Republicans want border security, like they've been running on it, the wall, built the wall, like it's central to their whole thing. At the same time, mass numbers of migrants at the border and chaos at the border is a political, as they see it, a political gift to them. Mm-hmm. Like that's good for them. So it reminds me of that saying, it's very difficult to convince somebody of something, if their paycheck depends on not understanding it. It's very difficult to get a political party to solve something if support for them depends on them not solving the issue. On the flip side, Democrats constantly tell their base that they're not for these hardline type migration policies. But they would like nothing more than to have the Republicans kind of force their hands to do a crackdown so that they don't have to think about it anymore.
Yeah, it's weird though, because there's part of the Republican argument is that allowing, this unstanched flow into the country is good for Democrats because, everyone who, when they're naturalized, everyone is just going to vote Democrat. Like there are
just
Republicans
absurd.
really believe
when are they going to
that.
start looking at their own polling numbers and be like, oh wait,
yeah,
we actually can win these folks' votes.
The Rio Grande Valley. Yeah, absolutely.
That doesn't seem to register.
No.
It's like this
really
gigantic Democratic scheme to let in all of these brown people who then end up voting Republican.
Yeah.
What kind of Democratic scheme is that?
Well, maybe after like 10 years, but yes.
But
yeah.
They can't vote for 10 years anyway.
No, well, but that's the problem. And I think that's why it's not necessarily, like H.R. 2 is not necessarily a hard line. It is in that it would make it really hard for people with dubious asylum claims to come here, live in sanctuary cities, like in the shadows, and maybe never have a path to naturalization. I think that's what's so sad about a lot of this is that unless, and some of them bank on this, unless there's huge reforms that broaden what an asylum claim is or broaden what a legitimate refugee claim is in the United States, there's not a path to naturalization for a lot of people who are fundamentally, and admittedly, they'll tell you this, economic migrants. That's not the same as asylum. These are two different categories, and that's why what H.R. 2 is trying to deal with is kind of streamlining what constitutes asylum so that you don't have people coming here and going to San Francisco and just trying to stay there until the law changes and just scrape by and just trying to get by, living in pretty sad conditions. And so the question of what's hardline anymore, I don't even know after how many years of a failed immigration policy.
I'm surprised that since they're combining immigration and Ukraine here, I'm surprised that none of the senators have done the most cynical thing yet, which is say, well, just draft them and send them over to Ukraine and train them and put them in the front lines. And then after they fight for the U.S. over in Ukraine, they can come back here. Because this goes to a little piece from Eric Wasson here, if we can put up this next element. Zelensky told senators that Ukraine is considering conscription of men over 40 to bolster frontline troops. That's from Senator Wicker. As a man over 40, I'm like, whoa.
Yes.
I thought I missed my window where I was going to get drafted and to go kill somebody or get killed. But this goes to a fundamental problem that Ukraine has, which is they've something like 700,000. People can check the exact stat. Military-age men have left Ukraine.
Yes.
And 100,000 plus have been killed. Many more wounded. You can only fight for so long. And so we could send, military hardware and weapons over there endlessly. But at some point, they start running out of people, whereas Russia does not run. Even if you take the U.S. Leaks this week at face value and say that Russia has lost 300,000 plus troops, of something like an army of 350,000 to start with,
right?
They've gone through a mobilization that is bringing hundreds of thousands of more. It's just look at the map. It's just a much bigger country. And so now if they're going to have to move to people over 40, then what?
Yeah. And that brings up a hugely, I think actually just a pathetic question as to whether the will of Mitch McConnell and Chuck Schumer and elite politicians in D.C. to wage this war is more powerful here than it is among the Ukrainian people. When you start talking about conscription of men over the age of 40.
Right. Obviously, there are many who are deeply committed to the fight.
Absolutely.
And see it as existential to them.
Absolutely.
Obviously, if you have to start conscripting people over 40, it's not enough.
Yes, when the United States cares so much about the contested territory in the Donbass that they are funding a government that is conscripting men over the age of 40, you really have to ask that question as to whether this is more important to Mitch McConnell than it is to the majority of the Ukrainian people. I think that is a very good point. There's a lot of support in Ukraine for the war. There's no question about that. But at the same time, we are how many years into it at this point? And the levels that we know of deaths,
right?
Yeah, 2 years in February. The levels that we know of death right now are staggering. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of people who have died over the last couple of years. At a certain point, you feel that much more acutely in Ukraine than you do in the United States, and that is I think a very kind of pathetic contrast, and will be brought out more going forward.
Hey, if you liked that video, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to Breaking Points.
If you want to see the rest of Counterpoints, go to breakingpoints.com to become a premium member and get the full uncut show every morning in your inbox and on Spotify.
Help us build independent news and get the full show every morning at breakingpoints.com.